Okay. Good morning, everyone. We are ready to get started. Welcome to the Infrastructure and Environment Subcommittee of the African American Task Force. I'm happy that we have a fair number of our membership this morning. This is a meeting just to orient ourselves and the public to our existence and what we're going to be working on, and to have a bit of discussion among the initial membership of the subcommittee in terms of the scope of our work, and to start to think through how we want to approach that, and give ourselves some homework for moving forward so that we can fully realize our goals as a subcommittee and do our work in the service of the African American Task Force that was formed this year by the legislature. So thank you for those of you who are here. I know we pulled this together in the last several days in terms of our membership, but I'm excited to launch and get it started and see where we can go from here, and get feedback from members of the public as well on the direction of this particular subcommittee. So with that said, we can go ahead and move on to the agenda. We will always have a couple of hours provided for our meetings. I think for this orientational meeting, since we don't have all of our members together yet, we likely will not take that long, but we'll see where our conversation takes us today, and how long that we need. So I'm just going to start out with giving a little bit of detail on the background and purpose of this subcommittee. We're, of course, a subcommittee of the African American Task Force, which was established in the fiscal year 2021 Grants and Aid Bill, as it was in the epilogue language that established the overall African American Task Force. And we, of course, have a responsibility to contribute to a report that will be flowing from that task force to the leadership of the General Assembly, members of the General Assembly, the governor, and a couple of other of our public entities, Division of Research, Legislative Council, and Delaware Public Archives. And on the next slide, a little bit more about the mission. So the overall mission of this task force is to study and report on findings and recommendations that highlight inequities within particularly socioeconomically marginalized African American communities in this state. So really looking at disparities that are impacting Black Delawareans. Of course, it's just the boiled down way to say that is what this task force is overall committed to. And of course, that was a goal born out of the Delaware Legislative Black Caucus's Justice for All agenda, in response to what we're hearing from our communities, what we're hearing from our advocates, that of course we are looking in our law enforcement accountability task force specifically at issues around police brutality and professionalism, but that we were very aware that there are many disparities that our African American communities struggle with that also need addressing, structural issues that have gone unaddressed for many years. And so it's our goal to bring together things that we know, delve into areas that maybe have not yet been explored, and make some meaningful recommendations for legislative change that can begin to close those gaps and offer better opportunities and diminish the struggle and discrimination that we know is faced by Black Delawareans. So the scope as established within the epilogue language covers, we can run back one, I'm just going to read through that list real quick, covers 8 broad areas that are sort of the floor, but not the ceiling. So these are the broad areas that we want to address as a task force. And of course, as subcommittees, we are welcome to extend ourselves in those in any way, but it covers education, healthcare, housing, economic development, community empowerment, environmental justice, community violence, and criminal justice. And for our subcommittee's purposes, I think Sammy, you can go to the next one. We are assigned to study at least this following specific subjects. So looking at issues related to housing, looking at policies that impact environmental justice in our communities. And in the conversations that we've had since the establishment of the body in legislation, we, made a natural connection to related areas such as transportation and transit, and utilities as well. So we know we've had a lot of conversations in recent months about, things like connectivity, broadband, and those types of things. So we look forward to grasping the challenges that Black communities are facing across the state, and bringing together members of the committee and experts who will help us really dig into that and come up with some strong recommendations to remedy some of those challenges. So we have an initial membership of our subcommittee. We were recommended to limit our body to around 9, besides myself. And of course, we also have one of the co-chairs of the African American Task Force, Stephanie T. Bolden. I would still say, as we introduce those of us who are here, this is a starting point. We have had some conversations with some task force and subcommittee members, specifically about engaging more members of the community as members of the body. And we can also discuss today other ways that we can engage folks and experts that might be missing. So we can talk about that as we move forward. But to begin with, for those who are with us, I would love to have you just introduce yourselves and give us a little sense of where you're coming from, perhaps what you might bring to the table for the subcommittee, considering the scope that we are looking at. So we'll just go alphabetically with who is here. And Dana Cobb, our new designee from DENREC. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Good morning. My name is Dana Cobb. I am the director of the Division of Climate, Coastal, and Energy within DENREC. Secretary Sean Garvin has designated me to this subcommittee, and I'm truly excited. I recently came to DENREC from industry because I'm so interested in environmental justice. We are doing a huge sweep of training within DENREC so that people understand how to communicate environmental justice, how to make sure that it is not just something that we check a box on, but it's in the background of every decision that we make. So we're excited to be a part.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dana. Really excited to have you here with us. Next up, Marlena Gibson.
Hi, Marlena Gibson. I'm the Director of Policy and Planning at the Delaware State Housing Authority. So my section works across the agency, and we as an agency are the state's HFA, so which is Housing Finance Agency. So really across the whole scope of housing, we're involved in kind of everything from homelessness through to foreclosure prevention on the continuum of housing. I'm not an expert on every single one of those things, but I will do my best to connect to other people depending on the topics that come up in the subcommittee and what things we want to explore more or dig into more.
Awesome. Thank you, Marlena. It's great to have you part of our team. Next, let's see, Simone Philpotts.
Good morning. My name is Simone Philpotts. I'm the policy director at the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League. We've been around for about 20 years, a social justice organization, looking specifically at most of the subcommittee areas of the African American Task Force. We've got a report called The Pace of Progress 2020 that looks at the disparities faced by African Americans in the state in all of these sections. So really excited to roll our sleeves up and get involved with policy solutions.
Excellent. Thank you, Simone. Psyched that you are with us. And let's see. And then I think last but not least with us today, we've got Willie Scott.
Good morning, Willie Scott. In terms of background, I've spent about 45 years in manufacturing, predominantly synthetic fibers and chemicals, and retired about 4 years ago. And in that period of time that I've been retired, my focus has been on environmental justice. And I think my background in manufacturing and background in operations has been beneficial in that sense. So I've since joined the Sierra Club and worked with a couple of other community groups guess I've spent the last few years just advocating for environmental justice in the community. So.
Awesome. It's great to have you. And you're sort of representing our Newcastle County perspective as well. Yeah. And for those who were not able to join us, unfortunately, for this first orientational meeting, we will have Wendy Henry, who's with the Delaware Department of Transportation, Abby Samuels, representing the Community Legal Aid Society. Perhaps joining us, hopefully shortly, we have Marlene Saunders, who will be representing as a Sussex County community member, Dr. Dan Young, who is administrator at Goldie Beacom College. And then we are actually pending on our identified Kent County community member who will also be joining us as we move forward. So, and we don't have to discuss it openly, but obviously all of you in attendance, thank you also for being here. Feel free, of course, to take a look at the scope of this subcommittee and certainly subcommittee members as well, and think about, are there any particular voices that we are missing that would create an effective balance for us as a subcommittee in terms of directing what we're going to be studying and how we're going to be pulling that together and deciding what recommendations to send up to the full task force. So really would be happy to talk with you all about that and hear from you on that as well in public comment today, or you'll see other ways to contact us. So we thought we'd really just have an open conversation today with folks who in terms of what we think. We know what our scope is. We know that we have certain topics that we have to cover, and they are pretty broad, especially when brought together to look at housing, to look at environmental justice, potentially also transportation and transit, and utility, issues around utilities. So I would love to know, especially since we have several, particular agency experts, to hear from you all in terms of what you think we should, how should we define success in terms of the work that we're able to accomplish as a subcommittee. So I would love to hear from you all in terms of what you think appropriate measures, appropriate types of feedback might be that we should be seeking, and how we should drive, the study that we're going to be pursuing in the coming months. So it's really just an open question that I've seen some of our other subcommittees engage in that seems to be just a really helpful place for us to begin to set a vision and help us narrow our focus in terms of our work. So I'd love to just open that up to anyone, perhaps who's done similar work before. I know Simone, you referenced the Urban League's reporting. Perhaps did you guys have any particular benchmarks in mind, or any thoughts about how we can define success in terms of the recommendations that we generate?
Well, starting basically of making sure that everyone has a baseline knowledge of the inequities that we face, and then making sure that the policies that come out of this subcommittee perfectly align with closing that inequity gap, whichever it is, whether it be adding additional housing per county, or making sure that there is a Bill of Rights for home ownership or something like that. We do have some thoughts around like education and housing, but I think the first starting point would be a baseline knowledge of the inequities faced.
That's great. I think that's perfect. So being able to clearly define that for ourselves, and then also, of course, for those who are looking on in the public, so we can help to illustrate that for them as well. Others, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess just to carry on with that, to me, I always think about outcomes, that make a difference or have an impact, as being a result. And because otherwise, why bother? So to me, it's, I think to carry on to Simone's comment, let's get connected with what are those core fundamental chronic issues that, citizens in these communities face. And, let's pick the few things that could really make a difference and have those carried forward into policy, legislation, or whatever it might be that put some substance behind that and some teeth behind those things to ensure that they actually happen. I think it's great, to get together and talk about these things and have a study and an analysis that kind of highlights the issues. But unless something changes as a result of that effort, then, it's just been an exercise. So to me, it's, having clear connection to a result that does make a difference for people who live in these communities. And I think the other piece of that is that whatever comes out of the committee and the larger group as well needs to be supported by the community. And so we've got a cross section of people here with varied experiences and exposure, okay, to some of the issues we're dealing with. And so I think it's great for us to use our wisdom and thought around what would make a difference. But again, I think it's the people that are most affected have a chance to understand what we're talking about and buy into what we're talking about, or make modification of what we're talking about. So there has to be some kind of interaction, I think, or exchange between community members to make sure that we're on the right track and get their input.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, so I'm hearing sort of a clear definition of those inequities. I'm hearing that we want to, of course, being able to look at the landscape of inequities to essentially to prioritize, to find, I want to say, I heard you say the most pressing or the areas where we can make the most difference, and to ensure that those things that we're prioritizing are really supported by the community and focused and connected to those impacted and affected communities. So just sort of trying to draw some of the key points from what you said. Dana or Marlena, do you want to add anything further to that?
I would add a little. I think I agree. There's a really big scope for this subcommittee. Environmental justice, and is a whole other field I really don't know a whole lot about. But I do think they are very intertwined, especially when we look at things like I can't think of the best phrase, but just the kind of the general geographic distribution of housing and kind of persistent geographic segregation and the impact that those have related to environmental justice and a whole host of other things that kind of have disparate impact on populations. So yeah, I think narrowing it down will be a task for the subcommittee to think about kind of what's most important, and there's a host of things that can probably be done from shorter term to massive longer term. But I think too that some of the massive longer term things are really doable. And I know one that I think I mentioned in our survey for the subcommittee that I personally would just like to offer up is source of income discrimination, and adding that as a protected class for fair housing. It's a really huge impact, and it has it's a major issue in kind of access to areas of opportunity and equal access to kind of everywhere in the state and to housing. So I hope there's a mix of big and small things that we as a committee can find and dig into. But yes.
Awesome. Of course. Yeah, I think obviously we'll be looking at, I'm sure there's some shorter term actions we could identify and pursue, like you highlighted. But then there's those big longer term ones that of course we don't want to lose an opportunity to start advancing on as well. So that's great. Dana, we're a small group today, so everybody gets called on. What do you think?
Not a problem. I would agree with everything that has been said. I think the biggest thing that sticks out to me is baseline knowledge or education that goes on both parts. Education leads to advocacy. And for those in DENREC and other agencies, understanding that they may have the best intentions, but they are not sometimes in those shoes. And what we think is that may not be. And so we need to learn how to build trust and communication so that we can get in neighborhoods and not make assumptions. And that's what we're working on. Also, we're looking to educate Delawareans on how best to protect themselves and where certain codes come from. It may be the planning committee, it may be your local municipality, and having Delawareans understand where they can get in early on a planning process. So those are some of the things, education, I think would be my overarching.
No, that's really good because of course we, our that is representative of and connected to state government. So that's the level that we'll be, of course, looking at in terms of our recommendations and those types of processes that are meant to bring the impacted communities in order to avoid these disparities is sometimes some of the areas that we need to focus on improving on and building that trust and engagement. I think that point is really well taken. So I think we covered a lot of good basics in terms of what type of work we want to do, making sure that we are identifying the sort of these baseline of inequities that we want to look at, and then working within that to figure out how do we want to approach those in terms of where can we make a short-term difference versus beginning to invest efforts into those longer-term ones. And also, looking at that public interface with impacted communities, both for our work and I think also at, the agencies, of course, that we are a part of are doing. And I also think just for my part as the chair of this subcommittee, we know not only are the topics that we're charged with intertwined, but we of course also have touch points with all of the other subcommittees. And I think we'll be, of course, looking to make sure that we are integrating our efforts with theirs along the way to really just sort of maximize the impact of the work that we're doing and the way that we prioritize it so that we're intersecting with health, we're intersecting with economic opportunity and so on and so forth. So does anyone else have any other thoughts they'd like to add before we move on? And for those of you in the public, hopefully you're making your notes and ready to give us your feedback as well when we get to public comment. No, that's good. That's okay. I mean, we can go to the next one. So I think to that point, when we talk about particularly the baseline that we need to establish in terms of understanding, just what are we dealing with in terms of our inequities so we can grasp the full landscape of it in order to start honing in on, how are we narrowing down? How are we focusing? What are we executing on? I would love to hear from you all in terms of what kinds of things do you think that we need to know, or even specific sources? So Simone already cited the report that they have at the Metropolitan Urban League, and I'm sure we are all aware of other great sources of research and data on these topics that we're touching on. And I would extend that even further to, who else engaging, perhaps not as members of the subcommittee, but who can come in and help us with that baseline knowledge, present on some of those topics. So I would love just to do a little survey, a little initial survey that we can continue to work on for homework after today. But what kinds of things do you think we need to know, and what might be some good sources that we need to make sure we have on our short list? And just open that up. And attendees, we're certainly going to want to hear from you on this as well.
Well, I'll just throw out some things for thought starters. From an EJ standpoint, I think we'll have any data we could find that would help us get in touch with, exposure in various communities. So what does air quality look like in certain communities? What does water quality look like? Soil quality? So again, everybody's kind of level set on what exists, where are we? It would be great to have data on health outcomes for people living in those communities to see if there are any potential correlations between, what people are exposed to versus what health outcomes look like. I understand that that's difficult to get, but you know, if we could get our hands around it, I think that would be instrumental to understand the real issues and the risks that people are facing. So those would be a couple of things that I think would be important from an EJ standpoint.
Definitely. Thanks, Willie. Simone, I saw you unmuted. I don't know if you wanted, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think Willie took the words right out of my mouth. Just the interconnectedness of health and income and education and environment, knowing, you know, how all of that is impacted with a racial to it. I know that there are a lot of resources out there because I've read multitudes of them. I just don't have them, and I know I can recircle back around, but I do think it's going to be very imperative that we streamline what's already out there. A lot of times we like to make reports and stuff, and it stops at implementation. So I think this is a good opportunity for us to dust off some policy recommendations that may have come out of other type of environmental justice groups, and see what can and cannot be done.
Excellent. Thank you. Dana, Marlena, any thoughts?
So I'm wholeheartedly agree with Mr. Scott. The air, water, and soil quality data that DENREC has to provide is readily available. And those are the things that we need to understand, understanding health impacts and how the two correlate. And that would also tie into what Simone said with income and education and the like. So some of those things I know are already available. It's just putting the pieces together to complete the picture.
So in terms of a baseline, I mean, so you said it's pretty readily available in terms of mapping it to, I guess, as we have defined in the code, the socioeconomically challenged African-American communities.
Yeah, it is. We have air quality monitoring sites throughout the state. There is a lag in how often you get the data and how fast it's uploaded because they have quality control procedures. But yes, they have water quality testing, air quality testing, and waste and hazardous.
And Dana, would that include data from the EPA as well?
That we can also receive that.
Okay. And the other component that may be helpful, you know, to kind of look at an overlay of all of this is to have zoning maps that, you know, describe, you know, where we have heavy industry or where we have, you know, industries that may create or generate, you know, certain levels of pollution, so that, again, you know, you get a chance to see how all that kind of fits together. So, you know, here's kind of where people are living, here's, you know, where the sources are located in terms of pollution, and here's what kind of air quality looks like in those areas. You know, so it gives you kind of a visual representation of what is, and that may help us, you know, think about what should be.
Sounds good. Marlene, you unmuted for a second. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the point everyone has been making, I would just echo that. I think, you know, from our different experiences and you know, and niches and areas of expertise, I think, you know, if we can, as a group, kind of pull together, you know, what are the kind of most useful sources of data, and what are the things that we should really be looking at. You know, for example, on environmental justice, I would have no idea what those are, but I can think of some for housing. And, you know, what of the kind of national sources and reports are kind of the most useful and that we should really try to hone in on. And I know one thing that I wanted to share for today as something that has been in the works for a while is a new analysis of impediments to fair housing choice in the state. So the AI, which is a very long acronym, so I apologize. The AI, was just what we call it because it's a long one, is a required planning document for HUD, and it's gone through several different iterations over the last 10 years, and there's been a lot of change at the national level with the administration of fair housing. But it's a required study. We last did one as a state in, I think it was last released in 2012. And there was some delay there as all the federal requirements for what those needed to include were changing a lot. And over the last kind of 8 months have been working as part of a consortium with the other HUD-funded jurisdictions in Delaware, so Newcastle County, the city of Wilmington, and also the public housing authorities in the state are also part of the consortium this time. So there's 5 PHAs, and so they're also all participating. And it's a really comprehensive look at a host of issues related to fair housing. I think there's some, it's almost too much. So that's it's almost kind of too much information, but we are finalizing an executive summary that kind of hones in on some policy recommendations there. And I hope we might be able to connect some of that in here, some things around eviction, particularly local zoning issues, availability of multifamily, just a lot of different things. So, I think, I hope that we can all kind of bring the things that we like that together here.
Okay. So I'm hearing a lot of, okay, we know we have a lot of different chunks of data out there that we want to pull together and essentially to map, to give ourselves a clear sense of the picture. And I guess that would be key to helping us prioritize in particular. So that's pretty helpful. I know we have members of the public as well who are chomping at the bit to contribute to this conversation. And I also wanted to acknowledge that Cassandra Johnson, a member of our task force, is also with us. So thank you for making the time to be part of our meeting today. And you can feel free to chime in however you wish. And because we're sort of a tiny but mighty group today, I think we can feel free not to put too fine a point on, so this is a public comment for X amount of minutes, and that we can, respond and have a conversation. So I'm gonna open it up. I know Dustin Thompson, I believe, is that your hand still up? Has been waiting for several minutes to I think answer some of the questions that we're asking. So however we give him the floor in the webinar format, let's go ahead and do that, and be happy to hear your thoughts, Dustin.
Yes, and before I unmute Dustin, I'd just like to let everyone of our attendees know that if they'd like to speak, use the raise hand function, and I will call on each attendee. And as Senator Lauchman said, at this point, the floor is open for without any limitation on the number or time. So Dustin Thompson, I am unmuting you.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
So I actually really want to just respond to the last question on data. So Willie raised, and well, I guess everybody kind of echoed the same sentiment of having a lot of objective data, which I think is great. It's super important, obviously. We have to make decisions on objective data, but I would definitely think it would be like a great idea if we could put out some kind of survey to capture subjective data as well. I think it's important to know what people are feeling in terms of environmental justice issues as well, and to help kind of focus and to help guide the committee. That way the results of the committee are very real to the communities that are impacted, because it's been guided by the communities that are impacted. And so I think it'd be great to come up with like a survey to kind of poll the members of these EJ communities and find out what are the challenges that they're facing particularly. And so that way it can really help guide the work and the reports and the recommendations, hopefully legislative recommendations that come out of this, to really hone in on the issues that these people are feeling the most. Certainly there's things that I'm sure we could all think of that we've heard personal stories, but it would be great to find out, what community members are facing. That was all.
Thank you, Dustin. No, that's a wonderful point. Did anyone want to respond? I think, and yeah, it makes me think about, we've considered, is the best path to getting that deep and meaningful information from our impacted communities? Is it, the addition of specific members to the subcommittee? That could be one step. Certainly a survey, I think, is a wonderful idea. We've seen other subcommittees also do some really interesting work that I think is more accessible probably now that we're still in a pretty virtual stance, which is, doing listening sessions and figuring out ways to bring folks from impacted communities into those listening sessions. So there are some various options I think we can do, yes, to make sure that we're getting that subjective point of view as well as presenting, collecting and presenting objective. Ms. Coates Johnson, I see your hand. Let's see, do we need to unmute you? I think we need to unmute Cassandra. Whose hand is raised. Can we do that? Okay. All right, she's still muted. So I hope, Cassandra, sorry about that. I don't know how to unmute you. Do we have any other attendees who'd like to offer a public comment? Hold on one second. Oh, yeah, we are attempting to unmute Ms. Coates Johnson and we're having a technical difficulty there. So I apologize. I apologize for that.
We have another attendee, Senator Lauchman.
Oh, great.
Megan Mullinex, who would like to make a comment.
Great, Megan, please.
Mullinex.
I don't know if it was an error, but I just got another pop-up asking me to unmute myself. So possibly technical glitch there.
I think that was an error on my part, Mr. Thompson. Thank you.
All right, Megan, the floor is yours.
Great. Is my audio on?
Yep, we can hear you.
Thank you. My question about data that might not be readily available and perhaps the individuals at DENREC would disagree might be long-term health outcomes in specific communities that would be identified as environmental justice areas, such as, let's say, a specific neighborhood along Route 9, South Wilmington. It has been my understanding that people have struggled to quantify the specific harm that might have been done health-wise to these communities, even if the risk factors that they face are maybe known in terms of their air quality or the number of sites around them. And so that might be done somewhat unscientifically in a survey, but quantifying the harm that they might have actually suffered over a long term of years has been something I understand has been difficult to measure in the past.
Thank you, Megan. That's really helpful. Dana, did you want to speak to that at all?
Just making sure I'm clear, quantifying long-term health effects. I'm sorry if I was not clear. I was saying that readily available information that I know of is air quality data that DENREC produces. Long-term effects would not come from DENREC. That would come from the Department of Health. But the readily available data about were those reports generated by DENREC. So I'm sorry if I apologize if I misspoke.
Okay. So, and I think Megan was I guess speaking to maybe getting some, I guess, anecdotal impressions of that as well. Megan, I don't know if you want to confirm that, if we can unmute you.
Sure, yes, absolutely. No, I wasn't trying to disagree. I meant that in terms of some data that was still left perhaps to be measured. And I was just saying because of limitations of what this subcommittee could achieve in terms of what is possible, probably not a large scale scientific method study. So I'm saying probably the anecdotal informal survey is probably the best data that you'd be able to acquire.
Okay, that's really, thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
And this is Cassandra. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, great.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Senator Lauchman, thank you for pulling this group together. And for those who don't know me, I'm Cassandra Johnson. I'm the Associate Deputy for the Delaware Division of Public Health. I'm a member of the African American Task Force, and I'm also assigned to the subcommittee tied to health and welfare. But because many of these issues that we're talking about, all cross over, I'm trying to listen in and participate in as many of the subcommittee groups as possible. And this subcommittee in particular, when you're talking about infrastructure, environment, really has close ties to the work that the Health and Welfare Subcommittee will be doing. I'm involved in a number of conversations with Willie Scott and others that are members of the subcommittee around opportunities and ways from a public health perspective that we can collect that data. Was just asked about. So right now we have a portal called My Healthy Community data portal. And if folks have not checked that out, I think it will be a resource for us over time. Right now it's kind of overtaken when you first go onto the homepage with COVID-19 data, but there are also environmental health indicators posted on My Healthy Community data portal. And the goal over time is to really work with communities and understand what additional data we need to start collecting that can be helpful as it relates to the environmental justice space, and start to collect that data and actually have it live on My Healthy Community so every Delawarean can access it when they need it.
That's great. I'm so glad that you joined us. We may have to make you an official liaison and make sure we can pull you in, as we develop this data mapping and all the stuff that we're talking about. So thank you. Do we have any other public thought or comment to any of the questions that have been discussed? As far as I'm concerned, there are three large touch points: is kind of who's at the table and best ways to engage them. I think we've certainly touched on that, as well as what will be our signs of potential success, and how can we make sure that we're pulling in the right information to pursue it. Mute myself real quick because I've got some noise in my house, but I see Kyle Shepard has his hand raised, and Kyle, we would welcome you to give your comment now.
Good morning. I just had a quick comment. Thanks for hosting this meeting and for the work of the task force members. Just picking up off of like the last comment about as the example of My Healthy Communities, which is like that portal and that dashboard, just really making information more palatable. My comment and question is just with the different task force and commissions that have come out of the work, not just of the Justice for All agenda, but also prior sessions as well, like the Reading Consortium. I'm just wondering what type of effort we can make around making some of the meetings and the calendar of events more known in advance, as well as just a more intentional effort around making sure that there's not overlap. So oftentimes there's a lot of different subcommittee meetings that are laying right on top of each other. So if we can imagine what that's like for staff and for legislators to get on, we can imagine what that's like for community who are trying to catch up with what's taking place. So that's just an ask that I just throw out there, is that maybe with what the Legislative Black Caucus can control within their purview, to just really think about moving forward, as I'm sure that they are, just ongoing intentional efforts around making the various subcommittee meetings, just as aligned as possible. And then not just the actual meeting dates, but something that worked well, I think, with the Reading Consortium in terms of quick infographics about like what was discussed or what people can expect. I'm just wondering how we not just measure success, but how we tracking success and then illustrating that. So again, just when we think about making something palatable to an everyday community member, does that mean that they're going to have to check meeting minutes through looking through the legislative website and then checking a document? Like, what does that mean for, the actual communities that we're serving? And how do we just really just continue to make an effort around transforming that information in a very, very digestible way. So just those two things, just about like how do we make sure that some of our meetings are overlapping on top of each other so community can best participate, and then what does it look like to really illustrate what's being said and discussed and suggested at meetings. That's all. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. No, I really appreciate that. And I know oftentimes that is an area of struggle. And I think since clearly one of the key factors that has come up, I think, throughout the thread of questions we've been answering is about the impact of communities and how they're engaged in informing us, and then vice versa. I think your point is extremely well taken. So thank you. Thank you for making it.
Thank you.
Did anyone else in the public wish to offer any thoughts before we start to wrap things up? Before we move on, I'm just making sure I thought maybe we had a new attendee and I didn't want to skip them over. Okay, I think we're all right. So just wanted to reemphasize that we do have an email address for the entire task force, African American Task Force, all one word, at delaware.gov. So of course we will welcome any additional feedback that folks may have to that address. Will make its way to me as the chair of the subcommittee, and then to our membership. And certainly any resources and responses that you might have to those key questions, sort of, what voices need to be at the table and in what ways, expert recommendations, data recommendations, measures of success that you'd like to ensure we have on our radar, please send those our way, and we'll look forward to hearing from you. So I think that takes us to our final slide, which is sort of made the closing comments, but just want to thank everybody, the members of the subcommittee for being here, to the public attendees for being here. Our path forward, I think now will be, of course, to digest a bit what we've heard today, and figure out the best way to pull together a presentation to begin giving us that baseline for our subsequent meeting, which is not yet scheduled, but there will be a full task force meeting. I believe maybe Valerie or Emmy or Vanessa, do we already have that meeting scheduled for the full task force? I think it'll be in early to mid-October. So of course we will be informing everyone about that. It's not my expectation that our subcommittee will have another meeting prior to that, but I think you can safely assume that you will be hearing from us in terms of surveying committee members as we begin to pull together more information. And we do have an additional member who joined. Sorry, Wendy Henry. Before we close out, I would love just to give you an opportunity just to introduce yourself to the other members of the subcommittee. And thank you for making it. I know we have a lot of conflicting things going on, but welcome.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Senator Lauchman. Thank you so much for the opportunity. My apologies. I had something that was pre-scheduled for today, so I was running a little bit late with joining. But I am with the Delaware Department of Transportation. I serve as the department's Civil Rights Administrator. I am very excited about this opportunity to collaborate with the members of the committee on this effort. And I was designated by designated by Secretary Cohen to participate. She thinks a lot of the task force and the different committees that have been placed as part of it. This one is one that she told me would definitely be one that I would be able to contribute a lot to, as well as get a lot from. So I appreciate the opportunity, look forward to getting to know everyone on the subcommittee, and just sharing some ideas and being able to collaborate to help make the efforts even better. So thank you for the opportunity to introduce myself this morning.
Yes, I'm thrilled that you're with us, and I look forward to that Del information sort of overlaid with the other types of information that we've talked about in connecting and elevating our communities. So I think before we call it a day, I wanted to see if any of the community members we can certainly talk about this openly or do this by email, but if, if mornings, weekday mornings work, such as today, we can continue to pursue this timing, or if anyone has any alternatives or concerns about scheduling, or just sort of blackout dates, feel free to voice that now. Otherwise, I think we will probably sort of pull you by email, if that works.
Yeah, this time works for me. I mean, early mornings or mid mornings, any day, but my schedule's pretty flexible. So,
Okay.
I'll be available one way or the other.
Yeah, probably a standing meeting. That tends to work for me, so that instead of just sort of cobbling it together here and there. I'm presuming that we would want to meet possibly monthly. We could look at bi-monthly depending on other demands on folks' times. But we'll set a standing meeting and go from there. Great. Okay. Well, if no one has any further thoughts or any attendees have any, I think we will wrap this up for today. I'm excited to be launched. I'm excited to start to pull together this information and draw in the folks who are most affected by the conversations that we're going to be having, and identify ways that we can make a difference. So thank everyone in the room right now for being a part of that, and part of getting this off the ground. And I really look forward to where we're going to go from here. So have a great day and a great rest of your week. And I'll talk to you all very soon.
Thank you, Senator. Take care.